Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. There are some stories we never expect to tell. Stories that start with something small, almost innocent, and somehow turn into choices that change everything. This is one of those stories. It's not about strangers or a sudden encounter. It's about family and the dangerous closeness that sometimes grows when the lines of trust and responsibility begin to blur. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who found herself questioning the role of a wife, a mother, and a stepmother all at once. My husband worked long hours, providing for us, and I admired him for that. But those hours also left silence in the house, long afternoons where I was left with my own thoughts and the quiet presence of my adult stepson. He was 23, old enough to have his own life, yet still under our roof while figuring out his next steps. What started as simple conversations over coffee or helping out with errands began to feel like something more complicated than I was willing to admit. It wasn't about romance at first. It was about attention, about feeling seen. He would ask me questions that no one else seemed to notice, little things like how I was sleeping or if I had eaten lunch. His voice carried this steady warmth, the kind that lingered in my mind long after the words had faded. And I would remind myself, this is your stepson, nothing more. But denying the spark only made it harder to ignore. The line between what was appropriate and what was not grew thinner with every passing day. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into his gestures, how he'd hold the door open a little longer than necessary, or how his eyes would meet mine when the house was quiet and we were the only two around. My heart would race at moments I couldn't explain, moments that left me questioning my own strength. The hardest part was the guilt. I loved my husband. I knew the vows we had spoken still mattered. And yet, here I was, caught in a storm I couldn't talk to anyone about. Maybe you've been in that position yourself, when you know something is wrong, but it feels impossible to step away from the pull. I wonder, what would you have done in my shoes? If someone made you feel understood in ways you hadn't felt in years, would you have walked away immediately, or would curiosity have kept you lingering a little too long? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is not a story of villains or victims. It's a story of choices, of the temptation that can live inside even the safest walls. And the truth is, the day I finally crossed that line happened when my husband wasn't home, and the house belonged only to me and him. The house always felt different when my husband was gone. It wasn't just the silence, it was the way the air carried a different weight, like every sound, every movement, meant more than it should. My stepson had a way of filling that quiet. He was 23, still figuring out his own future, but in many ways, he carried himself like a man who had already lived so much. Maybe that's what unsettled me. He wasn't a boy who needed guidance. He was someone who carried his own strength, his own opinions, and somehow, he made me feel both older and younger at the same time. Our conversations stretched longer than I ever planned. At first, they were casual, movies, work, random thoughts about life. But slowly, they slipped into something deeper. He asked me about my dreams, the kind I had before I married his father. No one had asked me that in years. It caught me off guard, and I laughed at first, brushing it off. But he didn't let it go. He leaned in, waiting for an answer. And when I finally shared the pieces of myself I had tucked away, he listened, not like someone who was being polite, but like someone who truly cared. That was when I started noticing the difference. I told myself I was imagining things, but there was no denying how much I began looking forward to those moments. The way his eyes lingered when I was talking, the small smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth, the subtle warmth in his voice whenever he said my name. It was dangerous, I knew it, but I couldn't help but feel pulled in. It wasn't about replacing my husband or betraying him, though I knew that's what it looked like. It was about the loneliness that lived between the hours, the quiet gaps where I wondered if anyone saw the woman behind the role of wife and stepmother. My stepson, without even knowing it, stepped into that space. And suddenly, I wasn't just a woman holding a home together. I was a woman who felt seen, heard, and, if I dared to admit it, desired. But what troubled me most was how natural it all felt. There was no dramatic moment, no obvious turning point. It was in the small things, the way he made me coffee without asking, the way he noticed the details I thought no one ever saw, like the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous. He noticed, and he remembered. That kind of attention is powerful, and it's almost impossible to resist. And yet, beneath every shared laugh and every stolen glance, the tension grew heavier. I knew we were walking too close to a line that should never be crossed. But once you feel that kind of pull, once you taste what it means to be noticed in such an intimate way, stepping back feels like the hardest thing in the world. I wonder if you've ever been there yourself. Have you ever found yourself drawn to someone you knew you shouldn't be? Not because you wanted it to happen, but because life has a way of placing us in situations we never imagined. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. The truth is, I was torn between loyalty and desire, between the vows I had made and the emotions I couldn't control. And the more I tried to resist, the more impossible it became. Every time my husband left for work, I found myself holding my breath, wondering if this would be the day something finally changed. And then, one afternoon, it did. The day that shifted everything didn't arrive with warning. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind that usually passes unnoticed. My husband had left early for work, the sound of his car fading down the street, and suddenly it was just me and my stepson in the house again. The sunlight filtered through the curtains in that soft way that makes everything feel slower, heavier, and I remember wondering if the world was trying to tell me something. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, casually making himself a sandwich, like it was the most normal thing in the world. But there was something in the way he looked up at me that made my pulse quicken. It wasn't just a glance, it was an unspoken acknowledgement of everything we had been avoiding. I froze for a moment, pretending to busy myself with pouring a glass of water, but I could feel his eyes on me. That weight, that awareness, was impossible to ignore. We talked like we always did, about small things at first, his plans for the weekend, how tired he was from work, whether we needed to pick up groceries. Yet underneath the casual words was a current, strong and undeniable. I laughed at something he said, too loud maybe, and when our eyes met, neither of us looked away right away. That was the moment I realized just how close we were standing, closer than two people in our situation should be. The conflict inside me grew louder every day. On one side was my loyalty to my husband, the man who trusted me, the man I loved. On the other was this unspoken bond with his son, a connection that felt deeper than anything I could explain. I kept asking myself why I couldn't just shut it down, why I couldn't just draw a firm line and step back. But if I'm being honest, some part of me didn't want to. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying little moments in my head. The way his hand brushed against mine when he passed me a plate. The sound of his laugh echoing through the living room. The way his eyes softened whenever I spoke about something personal. Each detail dug deeper into my mind, leaving me both guilty and exhilarated. To complicate things further, I began noticing how others perceived us. A neighbor once commented, half joking, about how grown up he looked walking beside me in town. She laughed, but I felt my face flush, worried she might have seen something I hadn't meant to show. Even my husband, though innocent of the truth, would sometimes tease us for being too alike in our opinions or jokes. He thought it was funny. I felt like I was holding my breath, praying he couldn't see the truth hiding in plain sight. And maybe that's where the real danger lived, in the secrecy, in the quiet moments that looked harmless from the outside, but carried a different meaning within. The kitchen moment lingered in my mind long after it passed. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just another ordinary day, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The air between us had changed, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I felt the weight of every glance, every pause, every unspoken word. That week, the house seemed smaller than ever. Every hallway felt tighter, every room carried the tension of something unspoken. My stepson's presence was everywhere. His jacket hanging on the back of a chair, his footsteps on the stairs, his voice drifting down the hallway late at night. I found myself listening for him, even when I told myself I shouldn't. The real test came one rainy afternoon. My husband had called to say he'd be working late again, and as I hung up the phone, I felt that familiar mix of loneliness and guilt pressing down on me. Not long after, I heard the creak of the stairs and saw my stepson walking into the living room, hair still damp from the shower, a book in his hand. He smiled when he saw me, and it wasn't the kind of smile you could brush off. It was the kind that made you forget the storm outside and notice the storm inside. We sat together on the couch, both pretending to focus on the TV, but neither of us really watching. The sound of the rain against the windows filled the silence, and I could feel my heart racing. Every movement felt amplified, the way he shifted closer without quite realizing it, the way I tucked my legs beneath me, the way our arms brushed just slightly. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. My thoughts raced with questions I couldn't answer. How had I let it get this far? Why couldn't I pull myself away? I told myself to stand up, to move, to break the moment before it grew stronger. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed, caught in the quiet pull between what I knew was right and what I couldn't seem to resist. The suspense was unbearable, not just for me but for anyone who might have walked in. One glance from the outside, and it would look like two people sharing space, nothing more. But inside, I knew the truth. I knew how thin the line had become, how close we were to crossing it. And that's the thing about temptation, it doesn't arrive with fireworks or alarms. It comes quietly, slipping into ordinary moments, waiting for you to make a choice. The silence in the living room that rainy afternoon was heavy enough to choke on. I remember sitting there, every nerve in my body alive, waiting for something to break the tension. But instead of a confession or a reckless move, it was something else that shifted the ground beneath me. Just as I thought the moment had reached its peak, the front door rattled. My husband wasn't supposed to be home, yet the sound of keys jingling snapped us both upright. My heart stopped. For a few terrifying seconds, I thought we were caught. It turned out to be nothing more than the neighbor leaving a package at the door, but the fear that swept through me left its mark. It was a reminder of how thin the walls were, how easily secrets could come undone. And yet, instead of pulling me back to safety, that brush with exposure only made the connection between us more dangerous. It was like tasting how close we had come to being discovered, and realizing that the risk itself had become part of the pull. From that day, I noticed a change in him. He grew quieter, more thoughtful, as though he too was wrestling with the weight of what was happening. But his silence wasn't distance, it was something deeper. His presence felt charged, like even his smallest gestures carried a hidden meaning. I'd find him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, and the way he looked away too quickly told me everything I needed to know. The second twist came in the form of my husband himself. One evening, out of nowhere, he mentioned how grateful he was that his son had me around the house while he was busy. "He listens to you," my husband said with a tired smile. "You've been good for him." I forced a smile back, but inside, the words twisted into something far heavier. If only he knew the truth, that what he saw as comfort was actually the seed of betrayal growing right under his roof. The irony was almost unbearable. Those words haunted me in the days that followed. They made every choice heavier, every glance riskier. It wasn't just about me and my stepson anymore, it was about my husband, unknowingly trusting us both in ways he would never imagine. That trust became the silent third presence in every room, watching, waiting, daring us to cross the line. And just when I thought I couldn't hold the weight of it anymore, another moment pushed us closer than ever. My husband was called away on a last-minute overnight shift, leaving me and his son alone in the house. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside me, lightning flashing against the windows, the walls echoing with thunder. It felt like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We cooked dinner together, trying to act normal, but every brush of his arm against mine set my pulse racing. The air was thick with unspoken words, and neither of us seemed able to break free. By the time we sat down to eat, the silence between us was louder than the thunder outside. It's strange how quickly the ordinary can become extraordinary. A simple meal. A quiet house. Two people who should have kept their distance. And yet in those moments, every detail felt like the edge of a cliff we were both leaning too close to. That night, with the storm raging outside, the house felt like a world of its own. Every flicker of lightning lit up the room, every roll of thunder seemed to echo the racing of my heart. My stepson and I sat across from each other at the table, barely touching our food. The silence was too heavy, too full of things we hadn't said. Finally, he looked up, his eyes steady, and whispered words I had been both dreading and craving. "We can't keep pretending." It was the moment I had feared, the moment I had secretly known would come. All the weeks of stolen glances, quiet gestures, and tension finally broke into something undeniable. I could feel the weight of every choice pressing down on me, my loyalty to my husband, the trust that had been placed in me, and the unshakable pull that had drawn me to his son. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was frozen at the edge of a decision that could not be undone. I confess that I had felt it too, that it wasn't just in my head. Saying it out loud made everything real, more real than I was prepared for. And with that admission came a flood of emotions: relief, fear, guilt, and a strange sense of inevitability. The line we had danced around for so long was finally gone. We had crossed it, not with a reckless act, but with words that carried just as much power. But just as quickly as it happened, reality came crashing in. My phone buzzed on the table. It was my husband. He wasn't staying overnight after all plans had changed, and he would be home in less than an hour. The shock of it hit both of us like cold water. The clock was ticking, and suddenly we weren't two people lost in temptation. We were two people standing on the edge of being caught. We pulled ourselves back, scrambling to put distance where there had been closeness, pretending nothing had happened. The sound of my husband's car in the driveway was like thunder breaking the spell. When he walked in, smiling, tired from work but glad to be home, the guilt in my chest was unbearable. He kissed me on the cheek, completely unaware of the storm he had just walked into. And that's when the twist came. As he set down his things, he casually mentioned overhearing something earlier in the week, how he'd caught us laughing in the kitchen when he came home unexpectedly and stayed quiet in the hall. "I've never seen you two so close," he said lightly, not knowing how much his words cut. When my husband made that casual comment about overhearing us, it felt like the walls of the house had ears. Even though he said it lightly, even though he meant no harm, I couldn't shake the feeling that the secret we thought was buried was already beginning to surface. From that moment on, nothing between me and my stepson could ever be the same. The silence we once shared, the glances that carried hidden meaning, all of it suddenly felt exposed. We didn't need to say it out loud. We both knew the line had been crossed and that going further would destroy everything. In the days that followed, I tried to piece myself back together. I focused on my marriage, reminding myself why I had fallen in love with my husband in the first place. He was hardworking, kind, and trusting. He believed in me. And though that night had tested my loyalty in ways I never imagined, it also forced me to confront the truth. The temptation had been real, but giving in fully would have cost me more than I was willing to lose. My stepson, to his credit, kept his distance. He didn't bring up what had been said, and he didn't push for more. Instead, he quietly poured his energy into planning his next steps in life, talking about moving out, finding his own place, starting fresh. Maybe it was his way of protecting me, or maybe he needed the distance as much as I did. Either way, the house slowly regained its balance. Still, I would be lying if I said the memory of that stormy night didn't linger. Sometimes, when I catch his jacket hanging by the door or hear his voice down the hallway, I feel a flicker of the tension we once shared. But now it's a reminder, not a temptation. A reminder of how easily ordinary life can tilt into something dangerous, and how close we came to losing everything for a moment of weakness. The takeaway, at least for me, is clear. Boundaries matter. Love and loyalty aren't just about saying yes to someone. They're also about saying no to yourself when the wrong kind of desire creeps in. Relationships, especially complicated ones like those in blended families, demand a different kind of strength. It's about protecting not just your marriage, but the trust and stability that hold an entire family together. As I share this story with you, I wonder how you feel about the ending. Do you think I made the right choice by stepping back before it was too late? Or do you think the secret we carry is still waiting to unravel one day? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear different perspectives. And if you'd like to see this story continued in a sequel, let me know. Sometimes the end is just the beginning of another chapter. Summary: A wife finds herself caught between loyalty and temptation when her husband's adult son begins to blur the lines of family and romance. What begins as innocent attention grows into quiet longing, and one stormy night threatens to expose everything. But in the end, choices are made, consequences are faced, and the fragile balance of family and trust is put to the test.